I'm Dr. Marilyn Sanders Mobley, Vice President for Inclusion, Diversity, and Equal Opportunity here at Case Western, a faculty member in the English department and a member of the Social Justice Leadership Team. So we welcome all of you to tonight. This is part of our series of social justice read-ins and teach-ins, and our focus is from conversation to action. And tonight, as you see, we're going to be focusing on Millennials and what it means to be a radical student. I like this title, I like this focus. We have some wonderful, they know, I refer to them as scholar activists here at Case Western, and to a certain extent, it's because of our scholar activists that we've had some activities on campuses, on our campus that we've had, and so every time we come together, it's an opportunity to give credit where credit is due to the student activists, the scholar activists here. I want to acknowledge our co-sponsors who include the Social Justice Institute. The Social Justice Institute is the sponsor, and so we're here partly in gratitude to Dr. Rhonda, who's giving a talk out of town. But she's still here. Don't you always feel like she's still here? She's watching us. And so we're grateful for her leadership. The African American Society is a co-sponsor. Office of Multicultural Affairs is a co-sponsor. Our Office for Inclusion, Diversity, and Equal Opportunity is a co-sponsor. And we always like to thank Shelley, who is the administrator for the Social Justice Institute. Yes, yes, we can clap. Shelley holds it down for us. And to Allison George, who's the SJI program assistant, who also holds it down for us. So we thank you also. There's a lot of flyers and information that we hope you check out before you leave, including that the last in the series is March 18th, as far as we know. That's the last one that's scheduled. And the thing is, we have to say as far as we know, because when we're devoted to this work, we don't know what's going to, as my son Jamal says, we don't know what's going to go down, and we have to come together again. So that's the last one that's scheduled. There's a lot of other information there, including, I decided to add the most recent copy of the annual diversity report, because in this year's report, we knew, which is a focus of last year's work, we knew we had to focus one of our stories on the We Belong Here movement. So when you get a copy, and I don't know if I have enough, but we can get more if you want it and don't have a chance to get it. So the rationale for these read-ins, and I'm really sorry I missed the last one, but I understand the rationale, at least as Dr. Rhonda and I have talked about it, and some of you understand the rationale because you've been here, been part of the work. But we know that most student movements that have occurred in this country had a background in research, had a background in knowledge acquisition, people wanting to know, what do I need to know so that I'm not just out there demonstrating. The demonstrating can be glitzy, the demonstrating can be hard work, the demonstrating pumps your adrenaline and makes you feel like you're really doing the work, and it's real. And, so you know I call myself a both and lady. So in terms of both and thinking, we both need the in the street demonstrations and the protests and whatever form that should take. And we always need to come back and educate ourselves and be sure we know what the issues are, be sure we know how to talk intelligently about the issues, be sure we're prepared for the naysayers, because the naysayers are always going to be there. So a teach-in and a read-in is about arming ourselves. So usually there's something at that table to read. There's something, a list, and we may not have a full bibliography tonight, but our speakers usually have some other works to direct you to. So I talked to Dr. Rhonda about our need to do this, and she probably would have done it if I had never mentioned it, because that's what she does. That's what I do as a professor. Years ago, some of you know I started African American Studies at another institution, George Mason University, and part of what we did there was have read-ins and teach-ins, and part of what we did at our events is pass out bibliographies, because there's always more you can learn. I'm a lifelong learner. I'm forever reading something. And Unique just told me tonight, some of you know I'm a Toni Morrison scholar. Toni Morrison is an octogenarian. Tonight we're talking about millennials, but she's an octogenarian who's just published another novel. So we have an opportunity to think tonight about lifelong learning, and I want to quickly introduce our speakers and let them have the stage. I believe John Killings is first. So I want to introduce you first. John Killings is Assistant Director of Student Advocacy and Programming in the Office of Multicultural Affairs. He's been here since November, but we feel like you've been here. You've been here a longer time than that. He's the Assistant Director, and he is responsible for creation and implementation of programming initiatives along with Naomi Sig. These initiatives include serving as advisor to cultural student organizations, coordinating the diversity peer mentoring program, and recruiting and operating sustained dialogue here on campus, and with helping us with our bias reporting system and with helping with diversity training, such as Diversity 360, which is our new initiative that we're piloting this semester. So we're glad you're here. Shakira Diaz, she's one of these people you say needs no introduction, but we're going to introduce the sister because she deserves her due. Policy manager at the ACLU, and she works on public policy campaigns, legislative advocacy, coalition building initiatives, and impact programming. This is some of what it says. She also has worked on initiatives that successfully challenge racial disparities in practices. She develops impact policy campaigns, has worked on efforts that examine hip-hop as a form of political activism, reproductive health care, access for Latinas, and ineffective gang initiatives. I love that. We had one in Northern Virginia, a whole study on why it was not effective. She has worked on initiatives that have brought about reforms in drug law policy, selective enforcement, youth and police relations, school-to-prison pipeline, anti-immigrant policies, juvenile access to counsel, juvenile shackling, sentencing, seclusion and restraints in schools, collateral sanctions, and voting rights for currently and formerly incarcerated people. All good, strong, important work. She's co-authored several articles for ACLU publications. She's an alum of Case Western, and she'll be one of the first people to tell you that being an alum didn't always matter. I'm an alum also. My PhD in English is from here. But there are periods where you don't say that much about being an alum. But she is one of the people I've heard say, because she's seen what's happened in recent years, including social justice work, that she's a proud alum. Can I say that? Yeah, you can say I can say that, okay. So we welcome you to tonight's conversation. We look forward to you participating after our two presenters. After they present, we're then going to do Q&A. We'll use the microphone. Media Vision, thank you for being in the house. They are recording this, so Dr. Rhonda will be able to see what we say, and we'll be able to disseminate it to others. So this is for our archives, for the social justice archives, that we will have it on record. So thank you all for coming, and welcome. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Dr. Mobley. Thank you for the introduction. I feel like I've only been here 4 months, but like you said, I've been here for a while. So, but welcome tonight. And as she said, I'm John Killings. I'm the Assistant Director for Student Advocacy and Programming over in the OMA. So tonight I want to talk a little bit about millennials and what it means to be a radical student. To precurse this, we were talking about this topic a couple of months ago when I first got here about what we're going to do with social justice and where we wanted to go after what happened in Ferguson, and we did the initial conversation. We wanted to do a follow-up, and I threw out the comment, how about millennials? So this is where that came from. So I want to give a little bit of background. So first, just to give you knowledge of who millennials are. A lot of people, it's confusing of where they fall into the play or where that number comes, where their age bracket comes from. So studies that I've seen online says that millennials are born roughly around 1980, 1981, and going until about 1999, or 2000. So that's about the generation for millennials. And they have a lot of characteristics for themselves. They're really described as liberal thinkers. They're described as really conscious of social and cultural issues. They also support a lot of the new norms, and so same-sex marriage, gender-neutral housing, gender-neutral norms, and things of that nature. So that's what the Millennials are really doing. So they're spearheading that. So along with the Millennials, I want to give a little bit of history, because as Dr. Mobley talked a little bit about with the young generation. So I'm glad you said that, and you really pretty much framed my whole presentation. So a lot of the work that's been done around social movements and social activism has happened with the younger generation. So I look back at SNCC and CORE, which were large groups back in the 60s. Well, CORE is actually a little older. CORE started in 1942 in Chicago, and it was a group, and it stands for the Congress on Racial Equality. Started in 1942, and then SNCC, which is a Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and they were doing a lot of the work around nonviolence and social justice, which really wasn't termed then, but really doing the work around nonviolence and being student activists. And the reason I want to give the history behind them is because they really put the precursor to what Millennials are doing now. So if you look back to what they were doing with SNCC, there's Julian Bond there. SNCC was really going into the community. So they were college students. John Lewis was a part of SNCC, Congressman John Lewis, but they were doing work around nonviolence and voter registration. And so when they were rallying together, they were doing research. They were finding out what was going on in the community. They were looking for ways that the young people can mobilize and do work around voter registration, building up on equality. They did different things like sit-ins, they did the teach-ins, they did things that we're doing now. So SNCC was that precursor to what we're doing now. They were what we can say started what the Millennials are doing now. So it's important that we talk about a little bit of that. And then, so some of these are the training sessions that they had. So they had a nice little mix, and that's John Lewis right there with one of their training sessions. So they trained. They did a lot of work with research. They did a lot of going into community and learning about what were the needs of the community. They talked a lot about how to be nonviolent. So that's what made them radical. If you think about the 60s and what was going on then, being nonviolent was something not new, but something that a lot of young people I would have said would not have done. You think about what was going on, what was happening with Black people in the 60s and how dogs were being unleashed on them, and they were having hoses turned on them, and what that meant. So to be nonviolent, that was kind of radical. You didn't really know how to, that was something they had to learn. So they were learning that there. They also were being trained on how not to respond to things. So as you see in the picture, he's blowing smoke on them. So if they were doing sit-ins, what does that mean to be sitting there and have someone pour hot coffee on you, or put ketchup in your hair, spit on you, throw smoke in your face? So these were kind of the things that they were learning within SNCC. They were getting a lot of the training and having a better understanding of how to operate. Then we also had freedom schools. How many of you all actually know what freedom schools are? I've heard of freedom schools. Okay, so freedom schools were in the 60s, and it was to compensate for what they were, the education inequality in the school systems. So they were all over the nation, popular in the South. So SNCC did freedom schools down in Mississippi, where they taught nonviolent techniques. They taught the inequalities that were being left out in the school system. They were teaching them how to mobilize and to be students and to be activists in the community. And so freedom schools were really important then because it taught a lot about where they needed to go, where they were going, and how to do that work. So they mobilized a lot of the youth. This is a actual freedom school certificate of my mom's. So she went to freedom school here in Cleveland. So this was important when I was growing up. We were taught about freedom schools. So for me and I'm like a little personal. So growing up, I'm a millennial, so I'm a part of this generation, but I was taught about freedom schools and what she went through. She talked about how they sang songs at freedom school, they rallied, they did, they donated money, they donated shoes for the cause. So when they did freedom school, they learned about what was going on with Dr. King, what they learned about what was going on in Washington, D.C. They learned how to go to politicians and get things moved and get things changed. But this was in 1964. I think my mom was in junior high at the time. And so she told me they skipped school for a week to do freedom school. So they just stopped school, which is unheard of today, that you don't like stop school to send your students somewhere else. But they actually did a week of freedom school. And they traveled throughout the US, different freedom schools in different cities. So this was the one in Cleveland. And it was really profound for her. So a lot of the things that she learned there, I was taught. And they typically happened in churches here in Cleveland or in area schools or recreation centers. So it was very important, and I was glad she taught me a lot about this Freedom School certificate. So that's her certificate. And this is Freedom Summer, which is another big thing that happened in Ohio. It happened in Oxford, Ohio. Freedom Summer was after the Freedom Riders. They were going through the South, voter registration. They're intermixing black and white. And the guy right in front of the doors is actually Jim Cates. He was here a couple of months ago for our what month was it? Was it January? Jim Cates he was here at the library a couple of months ago, and Destiny actually met him down in Oxford when they went down for the Freedom Summer tour. So, and this was, Freedom Summer is when they trained the students to do voter registration in Mississippi. And this is just a picture of that. And this is a bus burning down in Mississippi where the Freedom Riders were riding and they were bombed. So now that brings me to today, the modern day with millennials. So I was reading in Forbes magazine, and it was Joe Kessler. He's from the intelligence group, and he had made a point about millennials versus the old school. So he said, the generation before, the baby boomers and Gen Xers, focused on results, affecting change, and material end result, which I thought was an important quote when I was thinking about how I was going to do this presentation. So a lot of the critique that I've heard about millennials is that they don't make change. They're just rallying. They're just out there on a cause and social media. So this is why I have the social media page up there. Millennials are doing a lot of work through social media, which is good, and this is our platform. But I want to challenge Joe on him saying that we're not about the end result and not about what the material end is. So that's a little bit what the presentation is going to move forward to. Starting with the I2M Harvard. So this is a campaign that happened at Harvard, similar to the one that we had here at Case Western. But social media was that platform. So students at Harvard had microaggressions that were launched at them, and they did this campaign and hashtag I2M Harvard, which is, again, the platform with social media. And within that platform, they talked about the things that were going on. So like the young lady has here, having an opinion does not make me an angry black woman. So they did a lot of explaining of what was going on campus for black people. And so it spread like wildfire. It didn't just stop at Harvard. We also had it at Princeton. Some of the same microaggressions were going on there. We will not remain silent, just you can remain comfortable. Just so you can remain comfortable, excuse me. So this is something that students were saying there at Princeton. Berkeley, oh, you're Asian, you'll do fine. The microaggression that's saying that Asians are all smart. NYU, I actually don't want to strap a bomb to myself, Middle Eastern or Muslim. And so these are microaggressions that were happening. Wisconsin-Madison, it happened. So with the millennial generation, what I've seen is that it's not just in one place. We have the capability to mobilize everywhere. So if you think about SNCC and CORE, where they traveled to different cities and you had to wait to them getting there, it just didn't start there, they had to go. We have social media, which now allows us to go to all these different places. And this is the platform that we've used. So we have it at Iowa. And then we have it here at Case Western. Shout out to Unique, she's in the picture. Would you like to actually read what your quote says?
It was, yes, I actually go here so you can stop thinking I'm tailgating, I to improve. And it was in response to like a lot of students of color on campus, when you try to get into the dorm, like the residence halls, people will pull the door from you or they'll think that you're like trying to break in, so yeah.
I'm glad that you're here, because I can definitely want to ask another question about you. So do you think that you all putting this on social media was a great platform for you and your word got out there? So like making the video and it getting out into the society?
I think it was a good platform, but sort of similar to the article in Forbes, I think there's definitely a disconnect between millennials and like the older generation. I don't even want to say older because they're not technically older. It was people that were like, we just graduated from med school, but like there were people like, I don't know, I would say they were probably like 27, 30, and they were like, that's fine that you guys are doing that, but you guys need to keep your mouth shut and get your degree. Whereas millennials, we were thinking like, that's part of the problem. That's what you guys did. You kept your mouth shut and you didn't do anything. Well, I'm not gonna say that's why we do anything, but because of course we wouldn't be here if they didn't do anything. But I feel that I think the older generation, they think it's kind of messy to be like airing your dirty laundry on social media and everything. I think it's
Great, I'm glad you said that, because that's where I wanted to get to. So social media being the platform, you see now that a lot of things are popping up. So you see articles all over Facebook. I get a million of them every day that I'm looking at, and that's how we spread awareness. So I disagree with what your older colleague said about, oh, you should keep your mouth closed. The millennial generation, what makes us radical is that we are able to speak up. We're able to have a platform, whereas my parents had to, do something different. They weren't able to get that word out. They weren't able to mobilize together, but they also weren't able to educate like we are now. So for millennials, what really makes us radical is just social media and the platform. We have a different platform. We don't have the same that they had then. And then we have We Belong Here, which was a movement. And Destiny, would you like to say a little bit about that? Because I'm new and I'm learning since you're here, or yes?
What does that mean?
We belong here?
On the greenie, go back. What does that mean? You can sit next to me on the greenie?
The greenie
Is our shuttle system here on Case.
It's like a little bus.
Yeah.
You mean the loop?
Yeah, the loop. So I don't even know how that term came up. I'm still
They
new
used
here.
to be green.
Yeah.
They're not green anymore, but the name. Yeah.
The circle loop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Circle.
Yes.
It kind of came from one incident that happened, but really it was grounded in so much that was going on campus that students have been dealing with for years, and alumni felt the same way. But we finally came together and were like, okay, we're gonna try to come up with a plan to address it in a more formal way. And so that was like our platform, was the We Belong Here movement, but so much more has come from it. It's just I feel like right now it's like this basis for so many things that are going on campus, like promoting the Diversity 360, the bias reporting system. All these things are being pushed by what we were able to get the campus to start looking at when we brought up this movement. It was like creating that dialogue is, I think, the biggest thing that came from the forum, or like the beginning of the movement.
So they actually made the front page of the newspaper here, which again, more of our radical platform. So when we do things on social media, we do it to bring attention, which is one of the critiques that was in the article from Forbes, that he talked a lot about the Occupy Wall Street movement. And what he said was that they did it just to bring attention to themselves. They just wanted to get it out there, but they weren't doing anything with the end result. Which, again, I beg to differ. I think when we look at it as, and I'm speaking for myself, not as a fool for the millennial generation, but for me, when I use social media, I use social media to get the word out there, to bring the awareness. So when I do that, I know that someone's going to share it. So if my friends share the link that I put up on Facebook, I'm now getting people to understand it and read up on this topic. So then when we do the call to action later on, we're saying, well, you read that, it's out there. So then when you get the media coverage, it gets more awareness out to the community. So we look at what happened yesterday, actually with Ferguson. They made the results came out on the news last night, and then that propelled a whole nother social media movement as well. So you see how social media has been used for that. But one quote that I liked, and I think it was Noah Stefanos that actually had this quote in the newspaper, lean into discomfort. He talked about what the movement was doing. It made people lean into discomfort when people saw that our students were saying we belong here and that you need to lean in, and that it's not just about race, it's about more than that. It's more about we belong here. We're not just a race, we're not just a people that just, you look at us differently, but we actually are K students. And that's what when Dr. Mobley said about you saying that now you can say you're a proud alumni with the things that are happening now. I've heard that from a lot of alumni from different PWIs in the state of Ohio where they said that they didn't belong. They didn't know, and they weren't radical enough to make that movement. So I'm glad that I'm here at campus now. The students are making that movement. Some more pictures. They marched.
That was the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences.
Don't go back.
Wow, Destiny, tell me how you really feel. And then it didn't just stop with We Belong Here. Our La Alianza did a movement for students that were lost in Mexico. So they did a rally outside of the Tinkenville Center one evening, and then they were also in the center, and these are the pictures of the students that were lost. So beyond just social media, we're also gathering. So we're doing social activism through gathers. So similar to what they did in the 60s, but I think they put out a tweet and a Facebook notification saying, we're meeting up at Tink at 9, come. People showed up. Versus when in the 60s, students did different to mobilize people. So as I start to wrap up, I have a couple of things that I thought were the key components of what makes our millennial students radical. One, again, being awareness. So this is the OMA's Facebook page. And so we're bringing awareness to the conversation tonight. And I'm glad Randy's in the back. He posted this on our social media page and helped me with the PowerPoint, so thank you, Randy. And so bringing awareness. We're bringing awareness to social justice and to this teach-in. But we also bring awareness to things that are happening in Ferguson, things that are happening on campus, whatever our students are doing. So that awareness piece is really what's important with what our students are gaining, being radical. And then social activism through media. Yik Yak, everybody know what Yik Yak is? Do I have to explain it? Okay. So Yik Yak was another piece, although negative, but it was another piece for the mobilization of our community, where negative things were posted on Yik Yak, which then sparked more of a movement. So our students rallied towards that as well. And then we have the movement towards action. And with that, I'm glad that the Afro-Am did the We Belong Here movement and with sustained dialogue, because they then made our campus move towards action. So again, with Joe's critique saying that they weren't action-oriented, your actions actually caused the campus to move. So the radicalness of you being able to stand up and say, we don't like this, we actually belong here, using social media to do that, you caused the action. So now this is a flyer for Diversity 360, which was, we had a pilot 2 weeks ago with our graduate students, and we also had with undergrads as well. So because of their radicalness of being on social media, the campus had to move to diversify. We had to teach diversity to our campus. So this is one of the avenues that we're using. Then we also have the bias reporting system, which is new, and it's a streamlined system for students to report any instances of bias, hate, discrimination to the campus, and it's a form, and this is the website for it. But really, this is what...
Wait a minute.
Yes.
What? Can you explain this?
Yeah, so bias reporting system is a streamlined.
Go back and write some things up of former professors I had, so that's why I need some explanation.
Okay, so it's a new, well, it's not a new system, it's just a new streamlined process. So the system has always been here. You can always have reported to the Dean of Students, which is over in Delbert Hall. I think it's 110 Delbert Hall. But this is a streamlined system where we have a form where students can place their complaint or their incident into a form. So, and I'll pull up the form. Can I actually link back since you had the question?
And so what happens when you fill out a form?
So when you fill out a form, it goes to the Dean of Students office. And then the Dean of Students we have a team of 10 to 12 people that will then listen to meet with the student and to hear their concern about what happened with the incident of bias. And so then if it's something around sexual misconduct, if it's something like around discrimination, we will then follow with the student, sending them to referring them to a different office. So it's like if they want to see a counselor if they felt discrimination in that way, they can process it through there. They can go to Crew PD to file a formal complaint. If it's a professor, they report something with the professor, then it will go to Dr. Mobley's office, so she works with faculty and staff, so then she'll be able to follow up with the faculty and staff. But I'll show you the actual form that's here. There's two ways for them to report an item, which one, you can report for direct support, so when you report and you want to meet with someone, then they can meet with one of his team members, or you can just report it just anonymously and you can put in information what happened, goes to the Dean of Students office and we'll follow up on what the appropriate office is to how to address it. It'll be an annual report that's sent out every semester and then annually every year of what happened. So every bias that we got, we will figure out where it happened. So the form asks for location, and I'll just do, and I'll make sure I tell them that it's a test so that they don't get mad at me for getting this reported. So I'll say I'm the target of a bias report action, and I'll do direct action. So you click the next page, and then I'll have to put my name in, which I'll do. So then the form pops up and the student will submit a date of the actual incident. So we'll say today, time, let's just say 7 p.m., we're here. First time, then you do the location. And then if you want, I could put Clark Hall. We're sitting here. Then the students have the option to also put parties involved. So if it's another student that you know that did it, they can put that in there. And then they just go through the process. And once it gives all the information about what type of bias it was, the motivation, you have the option to actually describe it and then submit. And if you want to have communication with police or student conduct, you can ask for that information as well. But this is what they did. So based on them saying that they belong and they are two students here, we created these systems. So it brings back to, you have the awareness that they brought with the actual social media and the campaign, the movement towards action, and I'm losing my point. And the last one was the social media, the social activism through social media. So that's what all made them radical. Yes?
Question, how long has that been active and is it effective?
We just launched it on Friday, so we're just now.
Right.
So it's been effective before within them reporting to the Dean of Students. This is just a streamlined process for us to get that. So when we go through this semester, we'll get the aggregate and we'll be able to give more statistics on how effective it will be. Yes?
It looks similar to the integrity hotline. So is it
To the
similar
what?
like that, Shirley?
To the integrity
The
hotline.
integrity hotline. And if it is, I'm just saying based on what I'm seeing and how it's set up, that the integrity hotline, they get great feedback, and because it goes out to so many different people,
Right.
that they want to take care of it immediately.
Right.
It doesn't you don't have just one department saying, oh, well, go look at it. You got another department calling and saying, well, did you ever do anything about that? And I think you got a time limit that they have to get back to you.
Yeah, so the
You do.
Division of Student Affairs, we do have a time limit. So we have the Dean of Students and then his staff and the Assistant Dean, they have access to, they're checking it daily. And so the process will be, if you submit a report and you ask for direct support, you'll get an email within the 24 hours to meet with a staff member on the committee, and then we will follow up with that incident and then refer them to the right office and then handle the situation. So, and what the hope is that since this is new and we have a lot of different processes that are similar, we're hoping to be able to streamline them together. So we know we have the incident report system through Res Life, we have Crew Shield, we have the system that you're referring to. So we're working with the IT department to see if we can actually interface the processes together so that we can eliminate all of us going around to different departments. So, but yeah, so that's what I had. I was not going to be long. I just want to give you time and then time for discussion. So,
Thank you. That was really good. So I am not a millennial. I graduated from Case in 2000. And one thing that I wanted to mention is that all the programs and supports that are here today were around when I was a student, with the exception of a social justice institute. There was no social justice institute when I was a student. And the type of support that you all are getting is something that those who graduated with myself and everyone before me and those a little after did not have. So the concept of social justice and having a place to go to have those conversations and to connect all these issues that happen in society, in this community, in these classrooms, at this university was not available and intersecting and challenging systems. So I want to commend this university for even having that and what the outcome has been and how you all benefit from even having a social justice institute, that is such a phenomenal gift. So I want to talk a little bit about how silence stifles and how silence really endorses the violation of people. So when you've heard from other people say, you know, just be quiet, don't rock the boat, I want to show you where we are today because people are either silenced by others because folks are saying don't rock the boat, or they're silenced by their own shame, or they're silenced by oppressive bodies and mechanisms, right? So in order to prevent some of the things that we're gonna see now and the things that are in the works, we have to work proactively to speak up, tie it to action, and really seek out the supports so that we can sustain this work. Because as you all know, because you've been engaging in this, while you're, you know, in addition to being students, in addition to working, that we all need some sort of support system to keep up this work, right? So I want to talk a little bit about, you know, the things that are being shared and how silence has allowed some things to happen. So in this country, in 33 states, women deliver their children who in shackles, women who are in prison. The fastest growing prison population in this country are women. Black women are overrepresented in most of the states in this country, in our nation's prisons. 1 in 24 children in the US has a parent behind bars. For African American children, it's 1 in 9. It's such an expansive epidemic that there are children's books being written to help parents, help children, or help family members support their children who have an incarcerated parent. That's the visitation of a 6-year-old child and his father. They cannot touch. They're separated by glass. That is a 6 and a 7-year-old boy who must be searched before they can access their education. That is an 8-year-old boy who is being processed in a jail. That is a 16-year-old boy who is in shackles. Many states around the country, including the state of Ohio, do not have any guidelines limiting the use of shackles on children who appear in juvenile court. However, you cannot routinely shackle an adult in court. But for those states that have no guidelines, that does happen. I actually was speaking with some public defenders today, and one shared that she had an 8-year-old client whose feet could not touch the floor, but was wearing shackles. That's a 9-year-old boy in his cell. This country incarcerates more adults and children than any other country in the world. That's a restraint chair. The state of Ohio, up until recently, was using restraint chairs for up to 18 hours out of the day on children that they deemed to be problematic in youth prisons under the Department of Youth Services. Those are men who are receiving mental health treatment in cages. Over the last 40 years, we have worked systemically to defund many education efforts as well as mental health supports, and now our largest mental health hospitals are actually jails and prisons, and this is where people get treatment. How do I close this out? I don't want that to distract me. Yeah, thank you. So, and I raise this because while we know this country has a problem with incarceration, we don't know the degree to which we dehumanize people. To the degree that we have systemically dehumanized Black people, Latino people, people with disabilities, people with mental illness, poor people. And how that has infiltrated a number of different systems. And while those images can be very disturbing, we need to see them. Because the shame of not seeing that, the shame of not speaking about these things, in many ways becomes an endorsement of these systems, where we other people who have gone through these experiences. So how do we connect speaking up, speaking out without shame and connect that to action so that we don't see these things anymore? Around the country, there are a number of different conversations taking place related to the school to prison pipeline, for example, where in Ohio is like most states in this country, where Black students, Latino students, students with disabilities, and poor students are disproportionately suspended and expelled from schools. Not for fighting, but for disobedient, disruptive behavior, which is very subjective. Many of the people who are incarcerated in our jails and prisons are incarcerated for a low-level offense or a probation violation, not breaking the law. But because for the last 40 years, people have been bamboozled into endorsing mass incarceration, people have been shamed into believing that people who are incarcerated deserve to be incarcerated. Children who are suspended deserve to be suspended. The children deserve to be placed in solitary confinement. The children deserve to be in shackles if they get in trouble. In many ways, so many generations of people have suffered in silence. But now, as John indicated, social media and expressive efforts that document what has happened is not only educating and empowering people in this country, but it's educating and empowering people all around the world. Some of these images I've shared with a delegation of people from Eastern European countries and Latin American countries and a West African country. And with the very first image of the woman delivering in shackles, everyone asks, where is she going? Why are they doing that? We have to be able to speak to the realities of what's going on today. We have to raise the issue that the rhetoric of this country does not match with the practices and the reality of this country. So how do we do that? The same way that you challenge this university to live up to their mission. We have to challenge this country, these systems, to live up to their mission and to change their missions if they're not doing it in such a way that is conducive and supportive of our collective equity. Yes?
Ma'am, I have great respect for you and your claim, but I'm not understanding what is the problem with the current system if there's a market for these recycling of dysfunctions. What's the problem with that if it works for the overall construct, which is to profit by any means necessary? What is wrong with that concept? I don't understand.
What is wrong with what concept? With the concept of oppression, marginalization?
Kids being searched at the age of 8 years old, kids wearing shackles, adults being psychologically evaluated behind some type of cage as you presented. What's wrong with that if there's a market for that? If there's a market for profitability, what's wrong with making a profit off of people's dysfunctions? I'm not understanding, because it is the American way. That's the idealistic values that Americans have, is also to be addicted to profit and to profit by any means necessary. What's wrong with that? Your claim is highly respectable. What's wrong with that if that fits into the American idealism? I'm not understanding. Can you clarify that for me, please?
Sure. So part of and I think where you're going is maybe like where the foundations of this country are, right? And if we are coming up with a number of different ways of reinventing slavery, for example, or reinventing oppression, where we are oppressing large segments of people or marginalizing large segments of people, and there's still a profit motive tied to it, I think that what we'd like to see is a change in that, where maybe some people may not have a problem with that, but, excuse me? Let's raise our hands if we have a problem with anything that we saw. So I'd say, with the exception of you, we have a problem with that. So I think that what we have to do collectively, those of us who do have a problem with this, is challenge where we have gone and really speak to how we have reinvented various mechanisms of oppressing people. Is that the country that we want to be? Is this an equitable society? It's very, I guess in many ways it is very confusing, not only to those of us who live here, but those of us who are watching, that the land of the free is also the land of the locked down. So we are promoting freedom and democracy, but at the same time, we have more people incarcerated than any other country in the world. So how do we balance those two? Do we need to balance those two? Do we need to change our whole dichotomy? Do we need to force this country to actually be what it's saying and marketing itself to be? And we have to consider, how do we do that? And part of that, in many ways, is truth-telling. Social media allows us to do that in a way that we have never been able to do. When we look at and examine how Malcolm X and Martin Luther King and many of those who were involved, Sojourner Truth, who were involved in so many activism efforts, and that they were able to do that without the internet, is just absolutely amazing. The fact that they were able to move through and change this world in many different respects, because had it not been for many of their efforts, things would be worse than they are today, right? But we have tools at our disposal. And you all have ways of looking at the world that really challenge the way that we have been living. So how do we combine those two so that we continue to force change, that every single generation has forced some form of change. How do we continue to do that? And in many respects, there is a dependence and a reliance on the younger generation to do that. Every generation relies on the younger generation to do that. So how will you do that? You are writing your own history right now. How will you challenge these systems? How will you make sure that things like this do not continue to happen, that things like this are not reinvented? How will you tell your truth? So I think those are the questions that we have to ask ourselves continuously so that we don't become idle.
It's essential to first understand with what you're dealing with first. You mentioned that what type of country we want to be. The United States isn't really, it's not a country, it's not Syria or Libya or Pakistan, it's not the name of a country, it's the name of a private organization. It's a construct. It's to question what type of country is to question the morality of the country. And you're making a moral appeal to a state that doesn't have a moral conscience. You're dealing with a construct. You're dealing with an institution that doesn't have, a lack of a better word, doesn't have a social conscience, a human conscience. You're dealing with a construct which is it's systematic. Everything is based on the bottom line, which is capital, which is figures, which are numerals. And as long if you're not dealing with the construct on that level where it's affecting the numerization or the accounts per se, the accounts payable, then it can't understand you. It's like, you mean, I honor and value what you're saying, but you're making a moral appeal to someone who doesn't have a moral conscience. So that's where I'm not understanding where I understand your
I think
argument.
that my moral appeal is to the human beings who are in this room. I'm not making this appeal to the construct or the government.
But that's what you're trying to change. You're trying to change that social, that construct, and without engaging in it in a way that you can communicate with it. It's like it's steadfast. It's not it's like you're not going anywhere. It's not that you lack validity in what you're saying. It's just that there's no emphasis or no spark behind your force that you're trying to get across.
Well, let me clarify a few things for you. So in terms of how do you get outcomes instead of dealing with rhetoric, there are ways within every level of government where we can establish reforms, and that can happen, and that does happen. There are states that have, for example, the state of Ohio has stopped the sale of 6 prisons to a private entity, and that came from citizens and residents from all around the state of Ohio who helped stop that. The state of Ohio was once a state that allowed for children to be locked in rooms for 8 hours out of the day. That does not happen anymore because residents of the state of Ohio stopped that. There are, Ohio was once a state that had a crack cocaine sentencing disparity. The state of Ohio no longer has that because people have been engaging in their government and demanding different things. So when we look at the issue is, and I think we can agree on this, is that there are always going to be these battles. That where you may plug one hole, you may find 20 others. And that's where there has to be that constant support and that constant activism, that constant communication, that constant sharing. Because while we have had many victories, and many states around the country have had various victories. For example, the state of California, with a ballot initiative, was able to make a number of felony convictions into misdemeanors. They resulted in the expungement of records for hundreds of thousands of people and redirected the cost savings of prisons towards education. and trauma centers throughout communities so that communities who have experienced violence or trauma could go somewhere and have the supports that they need. So not to say that, that we're not dealing with reality. We are, but we have to appeal to the humanity of all of us in order to get the results that we need to see. And we have to understand these systems. Understanding these systems and understanding and appealing to the humanity, that is what motivates many of us. Some people are motivated by money, and that's where the power is, but there's also a great deal of power in people. And people have made some significant changes. The issue is that we need more and more people. We need ongoing activism. And sometimes people get tired. And there are many people who don't want to engage. There are people who want to criticize but not do anything. So we have a lot of that. And that's how we have to figure out, how do we appeal to the humanity of all of us? That what impacts me will impact you. And what will impact you will impact her. We have to figure out our interconnectedness so that we can collectively work. I think in many ways that's what made those leaders who were internationalists very dangerous. When you look at Martin Luther King, and when he became a real threat to this country was when he was going beyond the box that he was put in. He was put into this box about racial justice and civil rights for African American people. But when he came out of that box, that's when he became dangerous, when he was talking about uniting people of all races, regardless of borders. He became dangerous, and there is a danger in that, and collective unity. So when you're looking at movements all around the country that are that are multi-generational, that are multi-ethnic, where people are actually working together to advance reforms in whatever capacity they can do that. When you're looking at movements that are led by people of color, but supported by allies, by white allies, where people are using a number of different tools at their disposal. For example, in Ferguson, there's a group called Hands Up United. There's also, which is actively working to let people know about the disparities that we're seeing that the Department of Justice is now publicizing about Ferguson, but this group has been talking about for quite some time. There are groups of techies who are training young activists in Ferguson to become socially active and build up those tech skills so that they can become socially, so they can use social media to advance some of the reforms. Because what happens is that sometimes people are experiencing these tragedies so much, and they're living with them so often, that they don't realize that it's not normal, that it doesn't happen to everybody. And until we start sharing that, we won't know that. And we won't know how to combat it. We won't know how to fix it. And even when when the world is looking in many ways and focusing on Ferguson, but some of the racial disparities that we have in this city are worse in Ferguson. There are, in many ways, the world is looking at Cleveland. How will Cleveland respond to the handling of the officer who was involved in the shooting death of Melissa Williams and Timothy Russell, who were shot 137 times? How will Cleveland deal with the death of Tamir Rice? How will Cleveland deal with the death of Tanisha Anderson? How will Cleveland deal with this Department of Justice investigation? We're different than Ferguson. We're different than Staten Island because we have all those issues coming together all at the same time. So while so many of us are paying attention to Ferguson, those of us who are here need to pay attention to what's going on here and figuring out how is it that we make the reforms that we need to see here? How do we share our story? Any questions? Thank you.
Just want to open it up for questions. Any questions or comments? Yes.
As a case employee, alumni, and student, I just want to say, and of the past, I'm from the real old school, okay? I went to Freedom School, probably with your mom. I'm like just excited about our young students we have on campus now, because I would always say, why don't they say anything? Why don't they do something? Because I came from the time where, we did what we had to do, and we may have done it nicely, and a lot of times we didn't do it nicely. But at Case, I was like, I'm real excited, because it's like with you two, every time they come in the office, I said, okay, what do you got? You got some buttons, you got a T-shirt, you got some flyers, let me put out everything. And so I just want to say that you're doing a wonderful job, and if you don't speak up for yourselves and do for yourselves, nobody else is going to do it.
Just to speak a little bit to what Shakira was talking about, how we mobilize and make sure the voice is heard. I think both of us talked a little bit the same thing about where now the radical student now, what you all are doing is spreading that awareness and doing more of it. And you're right. I think it's important that we do continue to make sure that that is being put out there. And it's for Cleveland. I mean, I look at what you all have done here on campus, and as you just said, your voice is being heard has really given more activism to our city. So when you see our high school students that live in the area, like so John Hay, you have our high school students that are visiting, they see that, I too am crew, and they see that we belong here, and they're like, oh, let's go to Case. Let's figure out how we get on board with that. So you all really don't see that, it's more of an impact to what you're doing here on campus. So it's not just about like the social media. That's one of the things. And like when I was talking about the article from Joe, you aren't doing much different than what they did in the 60s. You just have a different platform. You're doing the same things. You're just having a little more impact because you have more reach. So it's important that you all have that reach.
So basically, I'm probably going to echo a little bit of what you were saying, but one thing that I was going to say is with the article in Forbes, I feel like the reason a lot of the baby boomers or something, they might think that millennials are not effective. Like I see them talk about like hashtag activism all the time in a negative way, or like yelling in the streets is negative. But one thing I would say is, even though, a lot of the things that we do, that millennials and like the baby boomers did when they were protesting are the same, I would say that it's kind of a different type of activism. So I always think of like, if I talk to my aunt or something about like, okay, well, what do you do? This just happened. They had kind of a mentality of like, to change the system, become the system. If you don't like how the justice system is working, become the justice system. But I feel like this generation has the mentality of like, to change the system, dismantle the system. So like, don't become a part of that structure. And I feel like that's what baby boomers are looking for. They're looking for, well, if you don't like this justice system, why aren't you the next judge? And we're like, no, we don't want to be a part of that system. We want to like tear the whole thing down. So, or even what he was talking about, like with capitalism, in one of my social justice classes, I think the year before last, that's what we were talking about, like how to basically dismantle the whole system. It's not about changing or trying to appeal and get them to look at the profits. It's about like, forget the profits. And also another thing is that we kind of tackle things all at once, whereas like the older generation, they will be like, okay, well, SNCC, we're doing racial injustice. And the millennials, we do the same thing, but even with We Belong Here, even if you looked at the I2M crew, it wasn't always about race. It's kind of like, okay, we're doing racial injustice, but at the same time, we want to make sure that our disabled brothers and sisters are included too. What do you guys want to do? We want to make sure we're using the right gender pronouns for our sisters and brothers, or any like non-gender conforming ally. Like, so we want to make sure that we're doing right on every kind of front. And I feel like the older generation just looks at it and they look at it as like it's messy. They think it's unfocused. But being younger, we have a chance to look back at the civil rights movement or the Black Panther Party and say like, hey, that was really nice, but you know, you guys kind of stifled the LGBT community. That's nice, but it was a lot of classism in that. So we're going to try to make sure to tackle everything. So
I think in many ways, like the whole idea of like totally dismantling something is something that a lot of folks are afraid of. And you're right, there have been many generations that have believed, well, let's change it from within. But you're still kind of working with a structure that's kind of sick to begin with. So how do you just totally do it and remix and make it something of your own and redefining that? And that requires some fresh ideas, and that requires not being part of the system or living in allegiance to the system. So I want to say that, you know, in many ways, people did believe that that would work. It hasn't. So where we have folks who are saying, no, we're gonna start fresh. We're gonna be as inclusive as possible. We're gonna share all of our stories. We're gonna figure out how we all connect and start something new. It's something that in many ways, just the idea of that is very radical, because you're not working from a shaky foundation. You don't want that foundation. You want you want to build a different foundation and start from there.
I guess that goes to me like being Unique's little, trying to come up in Unique's shadow. But I was gonna say the same thing. A lot of times she says it, then I say it. But the masters, like you said, when the master's tools can't dismantle the master's house, and like that's exactly what I've been thinking the whole time. To challenge this idea that the elders are saying that we're messy and we don't have an end result. But you won't hear Dr. Rhonda say that about it. You probably wouldn't say that because you're in it with us. The people that are saying it are those that are disconnected, and they're not with us doing it. I think that's the first problem. If you see that problem, you need to come on in and help us with that. And then when you get in, you'll probably see that we are working on these results and we're creating changes. It may not be a set list of a constitutional amendment that we want, but there are end results that we have. We have demands like CLE demand. There's lists of demands. And it was just so weird because Dick Gregory, he was doing a talk, and my friend told me, he said, they don't have results. It's just like the Occupy, you know, and I'm like, no, I don't agree with this at all. And it kind of bothers me because people don't even know what we're doing, but want to comment all the time.
Now, this is my opinion. Sometimes it's generational, sometimes it's personality, sometimes people just get tired, or sometimes people read something and they're gonna pick up with like that rhetoric and repeat it over and over. The truth is that in many ways, this era of movement is still very, very young. So for people to say nothing's happened, it's still very early. We don't know what's gonna happen yet. But you know, and when I say that sometimes it is generational, sometimes it's personality, you may find some very radical 80-year-olds who will be in the movement with you, but that's where they're at. And you might find some not so radical 20-year-olds who really don't want to engage. So in many ways, it's about where you're at and where you'd like to be.
I think for me, I also, when my parents had that, I had the same conversation with my parents, and I said, well, when you were in the 60s, what you did, didn't it go against what your parents were telling you to do? So I think that reminder of the personal piece of, you know, what you did was radical to what your parents were saying. So it's the difference, and I think we evolve, but I think, like you said in your presentation, reaching back, you know, to make sure we get that intergenerational connection. And sometimes we forget to do that. So, you know, with the Hands Up United and doing the technology, they're trying to get the intergenerational connection. So that's key, but you had your head up, so I want to make sure I got to you.
Thank you. I think you know, the topic is on the right subject. It's on the right track. But what it means to be a radical student, as the heading said, I think it's just a question of morality of the individual. As I question the morality of myself, it's mind-boggling that this issue of civil rights and equal rights and race and social justice. I mean, we're making progress, but we're making baby steps. It's appalling that, I mean, for God knows I love my mother, and I don't know who else in this room does love their mother, if they do, but who in this room would allow their mother to be disgraced and disrespected in their midst, in their face? Who would allow that? We live in a country where, and God knows there are more women in the world than there are men, but women still don't have equal pay as a man. I mean, that's just so alarming. And all this stuff about people, the police shooting this person and police shooting that person. I mean, that's just a smokescreen to keep you discombobulated, so you can't focus on one thing. So where is the morality? Where is the grumba, so to speak, within one person's, within that person's spirit and their mind, or even if they don't believe in spirit, where's the nest within side of a person that can say, okay, this is what I believe in, this is what I stand for, this is what you stand for, you should be willing to die for. And if you're not going to do that, then those are the people that keep their mouth shut, the people that's afraid of death. Those are the people that keep quiet. So it's not really the actions of the negative people, but the appalling silence of the people of good intent, which is very alarming. So, I mean, we live in a world where negative attributes of society have become positive, rewarded ventures for industry. So you have to have, and I agree with you, and I'm on your side, but we live in a society where, in a world where you have certain injections of conditions, and you're going to have certain outcomes of behavior for the sake of profitability. Okay? Now you have to have that. There's a market for drugs. There's a market for inequality. There cannot never be full equality because there would be no market. Okay? Everything would fall out. It would bottom out. So the question is, all these different inequalities are happening, but where's the question of morality? Not more so profit's sake, but why is the addiction to profit become acceptable? It's okay to be addicted to profit by any means necessary. That means if your mama and your daddy gotta die, that's acceptable. Okay, that's acceptable. We can deal with that as long as we're making $1, because everybody's gonna eat when people die. The funeral home eats, the hospital eats, the graveyard, they get money. Everybody eats off death. So that's why wars have to keep continuing. But where is the question of the morality? In other words, of the disproportionate thinking that comes from these people. Where's that question at? Forget about, I mean, we're not forget about, if so-and-so got shot, the police did this, police did that, but where's the question that says, okay, am I a sane person or am I insane? Well, where's that question at? I mean, we talk about all these different inequalities, but where's the question of the mode of addiction? Because you can be addicted to profit. And that's what this whole thing is, no matter how you look at it. Traffic tickets, girls getting raped, lawyers, judges, it's all profit. So where is the question to say, okay, we're addicted to profit, we're sick, we got a problem, we need to correct this. Where's that? Where's that on the heading, on the title up there? It's not there. We can talk about all these different other subjects, but that's just a smokescreen. So when I hear about people getting shot by the police, okay, yeah, that may be a fact, that may have happened, but that's not real, that's not the culprit, that's not the person, that's not the actual thing that's driving this whole infrastructure. That's not happening. So we're on the right track. I just think that we have to really unveil and put aside all these little idiosyncrasies, that things that are happening, and look at the real driving force that's really that's the real culprit.
There are a number of these issues where you see, I would say that there's actually more profit to be made off of misery than there is profit to be made off of death. So sustaining, health inequities, sustaining people who are basically living in poverty for generations and generations. I believe that that there's more profit to be made off of that. So I wouldn't disagree with that. But again, we're having all these different conversations about how do we see all of these issues, and how are they interconnected, and how can we identify the common ground to expose them? No question?
I just wanted to maybe brainstorm on some ways that the older generation and the younger generation can actually come together, because for the older generation, we've seen that they've been able to make great progress. And a lot of it was because their bodies were out there in the streets so much that they couldn't ignore it. There was national coverage and you just could not, that's how so much change became about, because you could not deny that these people were literally causing unrest. Whereas our generation, although we can really reach thousands of people in one tweet, it's not that same tension. So we need to have our generation out there tweeting, be here at this spot, and the organization of the old school, and how did you really affect that change? So, what I hear is us saying, they're wrong, we're wrong, but we all are fighting for the same thing, so how come we just can't come together? And I believe that if we did all come together strategically, the questions that you were asking about how to sort of recognize morality in an immoral country, Dr. King did that. His whole movement was based on morality, and he changed the economy and everything else. The bus boycotts, all those things, they did affect the economy. So I think if we came together and instead of attacking each other and attacking the movement, if we all joined with each other, and I know that sounds very kumbaya, but that's the truth. Until we come together, we really won't make change. We'll be fighting against each other.
For me, I think we need to get away from the us versus them with the generations. I think once we get to that point that we are able to speak to each other peacefully and say, yes, I understand your point of view, we understand each other, how do we then work together, looking at the commonalities? Because, like I said, I think a lot of the issues are similar to what they were doing, and we have that, but we don't. I think one of the critiques that I saw in literature from millennials is that we just aren't open to hear those things. We have shut out to say, we know it, we don't need your help. So I think once we, as millennials, get past that piece of saying that we don't want your help or we know what we're doing, we may know what we're doing, but I think it's better I always was taught that it was better to hear from your elders, to see what they went through and how they did it. Even if you don't go with that, at least you know the knowledge of it. But, that's my own personal opinion.
I want to say I agree with both of you about the need for intergenerational dialogue, and I like the reference to the boycott. What I recall about some movements is that you had to you had to start with the moral argument, but you had to get to part of what he's talking about, because apartheid was a dismantling. And apartheid got dismantled because on college campuses, students decided, I'm not going to buy certain products. I'm not going to wear certain products. And when the students got loud enough about those products, then the campuses had to go look at, oops, we've invested in that. And our students have said, oops, they don't want us investing in that, or that there's something about that system that needs to be challenged. So sometimes I think what hasn't happened is certain types of intergenerational dialogues. And I agree with Shelley that I'm proud of our scholar activists, because sometimes I'm a baby boomer. I'm 63 years old. Sometimes I had a vision of things I wanted to happen on this campus when I first got here, and certain programs I brought, but there weren't enough people interested at the time. For example, we brought the play Sitting at the Five and Dime. That play was about a group of folks in New York who went and learned. They talked to Diane Nash. They talked to Reverend C.T. I just drew a blank on his last name. But they went and talked to elders and said, what did you do? How did you lay your body on the line? And then they decided to make a play about it because they wanted to teach this generation what they learned. You know, they learned that people had to teach you to go against your instincts. Your instinct is, you hit me, I'm gonna hit you back. And they had to learn, how are you gonna take people blowing smoke on your face? How are you gonna take dogs? And so that was a generation, and it's really tempting to say, okay, that was then, this is now, can't use it. But there is something about it that we can use, and those of us who are from another generation need to listen to how social media lets you do stuff on a dime. You know, I was watching a little black and white TV waiting to see my parents at the March on Washington. But if I had had social media, I would have been able to watch them, you know, right away, not wait for the news break or what have you. So there is something about the work we're talking about that is messy. And everybody who doesn't understand that it's messy just doesn't understand. It is messy. And it's not, it doesn't feel good to know that some people lost lives. But some people did lose their lives, and the messiness that they went through created some change for other people. So that's why this dialogue is important, and it is intergenerational. We can't solve it tonight, but we are invested in it. We're invested in change, and it is incremental, as Shakira said. I mean, we want it because we see how immoral it is. We want it now. But I think if we can't tell some truth, if we can't tell the truth, and we can't begin talking and showing pictures. I mean, the visual image, if you trust the film Selma, the visual image is partly what made President Johnson go, uh-oh. You know, there's now white people in the movement. There's now a coalition of people saying it's wrong. So people do try to ignore it and shut it out. But certain images continuing to push, you can't.
You know, I want to chime in also that it's not that this generation is just reduced to social media, because, you know, so many young people are in city council hearings every week. You know, when Public Square was shut down, that was an intergenerational thing. I was out there. I wasn't out there for the Shoreway shutdown, but you know, when you shut down the economic ground zero for this city for an hour, that's big, because that's never happened here before. When you inconvenience the lives of thousands of people by not allowing them to go home and bypass all this, you know, chaos is going on, that is impact. So I don't want to reduce it to just people are tweeting. And there are those intergenerational trainings and conversations, because we are talking a lot about how to do the research, what type of ordinances need to be introduced, how to disrupt these systems, who do we need to talk to. So those conversations are happening, but I don't want to in any way disrespect what actually is happening. What actually is happening is social media, is action, is, you know, collaboration with like policymakers, lawyers, judges, and activists. So there's a lot of that going on, along with action, this shutting down the everyday lives of people that kind of forces folks to pause and think about the way that we are impacted by these systems. So I just wanted to add that.
Going off that with the, I guess, like, action that is going on, and that's great, but like, to me, what I observe is it's still disproportionate, I guess, to how many, I guess, specifically in our generation, like, how many people are acting versus how many people are tweeting or sharing awareness. I feel like there's, like, there's a disconnect between how do we get people now, okay, so they're aware, but how are we, like, I don't think that's a question that we can completely answer now, but how do we make that transition from awareness to engagement? I don't know, that was just my question.
And that is something to talk about, because it is much easier to engage online than to actually put your physical self out there. So how do you know, that might be a personality thing. Some people just may not want to risk that. or may not want to risk a criminal conviction. There are some costs to doing that type of work. But it might mean, meeting or just doing that type of training and support and education to recruit more people. So those are conversations that you all should have, because at some point, those of you who are constantly out there, you're going to wear down at some point. So you're going to need that ongoing recruitment and support to keep happening.
Actually engage. So if you so we do hide behind our computer screens, but if you're in class, speaking up there. If you're in a library, make sure you speak up there. As we've seen on our campus, where it didn't just stop online, they actually met up at the Tink. They actually met up outside of KSL. So making sure that you invite folks to do things like that. So if you put it online, say, hey, we're going to do a meetup. We're not just going to stay online. Well, let's gather to do that. So that's one of the ways.
I really like this conversation. It's good. It's like one of the better things I've been to in a really long time, so I appreciate you guys for putting this on. But I think that, the current movement is super multifaceted, because, I live in Cadell, right? So I live right up the street from where Tamir got shot. So, that sort of catapulted me into all of this. People are sort of keeping the current injustices in the light and just showing how ugly it is. But we're not going to put everything that we want to do on social media. People might think we're just on social media. I know you don't think that, but some people might think that, and it's a big criticism. But in my circles, the people that I hang out with and talk to and organize with, there's a lot of building going on behind closed doors, and we're dealing with a really ugly system that, frankly, we don't want them to know what we're talking about. So we talk about things in people's houses and basements and things like that, and we come up with really cool new ideas and try to really reinvent the way that we just live our everyday lives, and think about how we can build up our communities and really rip down the system that holds us all back. So, there's a lot of different things going on at the same time.
About some of the supports that you're gaining from folks from other generations?
Yeah, definitely we're getting a lot of support, I think. I look up to people like you and Angela Woodson, Dr. Rhonda, and I look up to, just a lot of people just in the city. Yeah, the attorneys, Mike Nelson. Shout out to Mike Nelson and Jim Hardiman. They're really great. There's a lot of support from the older generation. And I remember, first time I met Angela, she came up to me in the library. She was just listen, whatever you guys want to do, we're behind you. So we have a lot of support. We just have to, we're really taking our time, I think, and we're just trying to come up with cohesive plans and trying to really make them proper. So when we present things to people from the older generation who have resources that we need, they'll be compelled to actually help us. So I think that's what, a lot of people that I'm involved with spend our time on. And another thing is people, I'm 22, right? So I guess I should have graduated college right now, but I dropped out a while ago, so I'm not a graduate. But I'm student age, so I really want to see how I can support Case students and CSU students and just students in general that are having problems on campus, and how they can support people who maybe aren't taking that path, just so we can have more people connected and unified and working towards common goals.
So, that's an opportunity right there. When we're talking about how do we get more people involved, that's a call right there. So how do we continue to grow and connect?
Some of that is, when we see these on campus, doing those bridging of the gaps, so we have our community So like a lot of our groups through USG allow for non-students to be a part of the group. So it's coming to the meetings and then figuring out how you meet up and then you collaborate. So I think the opportunity is there. It's just making sure that you all connect with each other. And I know that we are in interest of time, so if you have to leave, feel free. Fill out the survey, well, the survey that we have for the evaluation, but we will continue the conversation on. So I know you had your hand up for a while. So.
Yeah, I actually was just going to say, like, I know that I've been in like the groups with Courtney before, and there is a lot of talking. They call it like the elders, and at first Destiny and I was like, that's such a funny term, like, cause we've never heard of that before. I mean, like you hear it, but it's like in books and movies and stuff. But like, yeah, and they give like really good advice. Like one of the best things I ever heard, and it was like she was talking about like what's radical. And she was like, the elder was like, what's radical is not standing in the streets yelling. It's like, you know, standing next to your brother and sister, and like no matter what happens, you're still standing there at the end, like whether it's like you guys end up going to jail, whatever. And she ended up leaving. But what I was gonna say, she's gonna say about a lot of our generation, like they have the awareness component, but they don't have the engagement component. And the one thing that I would say is just to get involved, like when an opportunity is passed your way, or even if you don't have an opportunity, Destiny knows all the time. When she wants to do something on campus, she'll be like, because Destiny, she's a political science major, so she's very organized. I'm not. So she'll be like, I haven't sent out a formal email about this. And I'll be like, girl, I don't care if it's just me and you. We can go out here and protest in these streets with just us two. And I'm sure that people that are down for the cause, they'll join. But yeah, I feel like the reason why it's kind of hard for this generation, and I like what Dr. Mobley says all the time, like, I think people think of it as like either or, so you're either radical or a student, but it really is a both and thing. But it is hard to find that balance to be both a radical and a student. So I feel like a lot of times what students do is they take the easy route and they'll say, well, I'll just raise awareness. You know, me sharing this status, this is radical. And I mean, and it is. I don't want to minimize that. But at some point, we have to challenge ourselves that if you really care about a cause, like you say you care about it, you will find the time, or, I mean, even if you don't know how to do it, you'll get with someone. I mean, the professors, some of them are former student activists, it might not have been for the same cause, but they know about it. Like, you know, how to manage your schedule. Like, how do you invest in yourself, like self-care and everything like that. They'll give you pointers. And, one thing that I will always say, and I say this to Michaela, I say this to Destiny all the time, if you're only 99.9% in, you are 100% out. I can't. You have to have it like made up in your mind. Even if you're kind of afraid, it's kind of like at the end of the day, that's the part about being radical. Like she said, like still standing next to your brother and sister. So like you said, what happens to you, it affects me. What happens to me affects her. So it's, if you're only 99.9% in, you're 100% out.
So you're all for, we have to make sure we put some skin in the game, not just, you know, and there's a price to pay for that. But hopefully you value the reward or the potential reward over the price that you have to pay.
And I'm also going to plug the offices, so you said the support. We do have support. So all of our co-sponsors for tonight's event are good our support for you all. So the Office of Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity is a support. The Office of Multicultural Affairs, Social Justice Institute. So if you all need that support, if you are at the point that you're tired and you can't do all, we are here to help you out with that. So, you know, that's always there. We have any more questions? I know people are wrapping up, but I, want to leave room, but, okay.
Courtney, sorry to put you on the spot like this, but I was writing about the Griot fundamentals. It's like they're having a teaching for poets, like how you can use your poetry and everything for activism. It's tomorrow at the East Cleveland Theater. So I don't know the address offhand. Oh gosh, my phone died. I had it in my phone and I was writing it up there, but yeah. Okay, yeah, he has it. Okay. Oh yeah, social media. Get with it.
Are you talking about the Peace Sports thing?
Here's my card. Send it to me.
It's tomorrow at 7.
Oh, this thing. Is it the thing that NAA is doing?
Yeah, it sounds like an NAA thing.
Oh, okay. It's tomorrow at East Cleveland Community Theater, 14108 Euclid Avenue, East Cleveland. I guess it's a fundamentals poetry workshop. Okay, cool. I guess they're going to start doing them every Thursday, 7 to 9 p.m. at East Cleveland Community Theater. Purpose of the workshop is to train warrior poets, that is, poets who are able to use their words to inspire and incite change in their communities. So, it looks like it's going to be just how to turn your artistry into affecting change. So, yeah, that starts tomorrow.
Well, thank you all for coming. We do appreciate it. And Allison, did you have anything to say or close out or anything to add? Make sure you sign in and please turn in the evaluation for this evening. Thank you for coming.